The senator from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. President, exports are absolutely critical to our economic growth in this country. In fact, there are nearly 10 million good-paying American jobs that are related to exports. The President, members of Congress, and so on talk about that a lot, but I'm disappointed that we're not moving forward with an aggressive agenda to actually open up new markets for our exports. I am encouraged that the administration finally this week sent forward 3 trade agreements that do just that, the Korea, Colombia, and Panama trade agreements. These open up markets to U.S. workers and farmers, those who provide services, and so it's going to be good for jobs in this country. The President's own metrics indicate that these 3 agreements alone will create 250,000 new jobs, and we need them badly. I also want to congratulate Chairman Dave Camp and the Ways and Means Committee for reporting out all 3 of these agreements this afternoon. My understanding is each agreement received a strong bipartisan vote, and I'm hopeful that those agreements will now come to the United States Senate for us to be able to move forward, again, opening up these critical markets that will create over 200,000 jobs for Americans. I will tell you, these 3 agreements were all negotiated and signed over 4 years ago. And during that interim period, the United States has been absent from the kind of trade opening negotiations we ought to be involved with. Now, this President, for the first time since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, has not asked, as his predecessors did, for the Trade Promotion Authority to be able to negotiate new agreements. So we're losing market share. Every day, there are American workers who do not have the same opportunities to compete in foreign markets as those workers from other countries do because the United States is not actively engaged in opening up markets. We need to do that. Right now, we have no ongoing bilateral trade agreements. We have one multilateral agreement, which I support moving forward on, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But frankly, there are over 100 bilateral negotiations going on right now, and America is not a partner in any of them. We need to get back engaged because it's so critical to growing our economy. During the debate that we've had over the last couple of weeks on trade adjustment assistance, where I was supportive of a version of trade adjustment assistance to get the trade agreements moving, we had a discussion about giving the President Trade Promotion Authority. We were not able to get support from the administration for that. This is critical to move forward. And it's because growing goods and services is absolutely critical to our economic health here. Over 95% of consumers in the world, of course, live outside of our borders. We want to access those consumers. We want to sell more to them. Export growth and a healthy trading system depends on these export opening agreements, but it also depends on having a healthy international trading system where all the players play by the international rules. So the export expanding agreements are good. We need to do more of that. We should be much more engaged. But we also have to insist that everybody plays by the same rules. Today, the Senate is debating legislation that has to do with one of those rules, and that's the issue of currency, and specifically the issue of China and their currency manipulation. China is a country, as you know, where we have a persistent and really unprecedented trade deficit. It's also a very important trading partner for us. So it's critical that we keep that strong trade relationship, but do it on a basis that is fair for us and for China. I hear about this China currency issue when I'm back in Ohio consistently. I hear it a lot from manufacturers and the workers at those plants who tell me that it's just not fair that in the global marketplace, Ohio products aren't able to compete on a level playing field. Just this year, I've worked with a lot of Ohio companies who are facing various problems, including Ohio candle makers, steel manufacturers, diamond blade saw producers, rare earth magnet manufacturers, others who are concerned about getting a fair shake in the global economy and want to be sure that they're not competing with unfair Chinese competition. Again, I believe in the benefits of trade. I know they work. I believe in reducing barriers. But I also believe that opening export markets and vigorous enforcement of trade laws go hand in hand. They should be both something that the United States pursues. China's undervalued currency does provide, in my view, an export subsidy, making Chinese exports to the United States less expensive in the global marketplace and making our exports to China relatively more expensive. I've long had concerns about this. Actually, when I was before this Senate Finance Committee at my confirmation hearings to be U.S. Trade Representative years ago, I stated that I believe that China currency does affect trade, and I stated that China should revalue their currency. I still believe that. I believe this administration should label China a currency manipulator, because I think it's clear that there continues to be manipulation. The legislation before us today is not the perfect answer, and I do hope that the Senate will permit my colleague, Senator Hatch, to offer his amendment, which I think is a constructive amendment to improve parts of the legislation. But I do support the bill with the expectation that it is compliant with our international trade obligations and that it gives the administration the flexibility it needs to implement this bill in a smart and sensible way. However, I would also say that this bill has been described on this floor many times over the last couple of days as I've listened to the debate as doing more than it does. We shouldn't overstate it. It doesn't address some other issues that, frankly, I think would make a bigger difference in our important trade relationship with China. One of these issues would be indigenous innovation, which I believe to be an unfair practice that China is currently practicing. Also violations of intellectual property rights. It's not so much that the laws aren't in place, it's that many times there's not adequate enforcement of the intellectual property laws that are in place. And, of course, the anti-competitive practices and subsidies that continue with regard to state-owned enterprises. I'm also working with Senator Wyden and others, a bipartisan group of senators, on combating transshipment and customs duty evasion problems, which involve companies from various countries but include China. So we have a growing list of complex issues facing our relationship with China. I believe they should all be addressed together. I hope the next round of diplomatic and commercial negotiations with China will bring about some of that discussion and bring about some solutions, not just more broken promises. I understand the JCCT, called the Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade between the United States and China, will meet in November next month, and that the next round of the U.S.-China Strategic and Economic Dialogue will take place next year. I urge the administration to use these negotiations as leverage to get some of these real results that are so necessary. We should also look at multilateral approaches, including the World Trade Organization and certainly the International Monetary Fund. And I would tell you, as someone who has sat across the table in negotiations with tough Chinese negotiators, endless dialogue is not the answer, and sometimes that's what occurs. We're not just looking for more talk. I think it's important that we get serious, both U.S. leaders and Chinese leaders, about some of our lingering trade problems that we've had through the years so that we can have a healthy trade relationship based on mutual respect. Each country is important to the other. We can't overlook the fact that China continues to be a very vital U.S. export market despite the issues I talked about. Right now, China is the third largest export market for Ohio goods, for instance. The state I represent sends over $2.2 billion a year to China. With 25% of Ohio manufacturing jobs dependent upon exports, this is incredibly important to us. 1 out of every 3 acres in Ohio is planted for export. So agriculture exports are also important. And there's also an important issue with China that relates to investment both ways, our investment in China and Chinese investment here. Let me read you from an editorial that was in the Cleveland Plain Dealer last Thursday. Its title was, "Chinese Investors Are Welcome Here." If Greater Cleveland's going to prosper in the 21st century, the editorial said, it has to build strong two-way connections with the rest of the world. The region has to sell more of its services and products abroad and welcome talent and capital from overseas. That's the path to jobs and wealth. The editorial goes on to talk about the collaboration between Chinese companies and investors looking to build relationships with Cleveland's world-renowned medical device industry. Just last week, the mayor of Toledo, Ohio, Mike Bell, returned from a 12-day trade mission to Asia in order to boost job creation in Northwest Ohio. Since Mayor Bell's trip, plans have been announced for increased commercial ties between China and Ohio, job creators and companies, including launching a new international business center in downtown Toledo. These are just a couple of examples in my state of the importance of this relationship and why it needs to be taken so seriously. The relationship is vital to the future not just of our two countries, but in my view to the global economy. So we need to be sure again that it's a healthy relationship. It needs to be fair. It needs to be on a basis where, again, there is a level playing field on both sides. So it's time for our trading partners to play by the rules so that, indeed, we can have a fair trading system. Trade is key to growth, but, again, it's only one part of a broader problem that is holding back our economy today, holding back Ohio manufacturers from hiring and innovating. Another big issue that has come to the attention of this Senate time and time again is the incredible regulatory burden that's placed on Ohio's job creators. So in order to be successful in trade, we need to have more open markets. We talked about that, a level playing field, but also we need to be more competitive here at home, or else we're not going to be able to create the jobs in this century that we need to keep our economy moving forward. At a time of over 9% unemployment, it's critical that we be sure that our economy here is more competitive. This regulatory burden is one that I think all sides can agree is one that ought to be addressed. I'm joined today by the junior senator from Nevada, my friend and colleague, to offer a couple of amendments designed to give American employers some relief from the regulatory mandates to continue to hold back our economy and hinder job creation. There's no official counting of this total regulatory burden in our economy, and estimates do vary, but one study that's often cited is from the Obama administration's own Small Business Administration, where they report that regulatory costs exceed $1.75 trillion annually. That's, of course, even more than is collected by the IRS in income taxes every year. So it's a huge burden. We can talk about what the exact number is, but the fact is this is something that is forcing Ohio companies and other companies around our country to have higher costs of creating a job. The Office of Management and Budget estimates that the annual cost of a narrow set of rules, these are just what are called the major rules that are reviewed by OMB over one 10-year period, registers at $43 billion to $55 billion per year. I've been encouraged by what the current administration has recently been saying about regulations. I've been less encouraged about what they have done. The new regulatory costs on the private sector are real and they are mounting. Compared to historic trends, we've seen a sharp uptick in the last 2 years in these so-called major or economically significant rules that have an economic impact of over $100 million on the economy. They also have an impact, of course, on things like consumer prices and American competitiveness. George Washington University regulatory studies recently told us that this administration has been regulating on an average of 84 new major rules per year, which by way of comparison is about a 35% increase from the last administration and about a 50% increase from the Clinton administration. And these figures do include the independent agencies, which must be included in the calculation. So there has been an uptick in regulations, continues to be, again, despite much of the rhetoric to the contrary. One common sense step we can take to address this issue is to improve and strengthen what's called the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act of 1995, UMRA. I worked on this along with some of my colleagues who are now in the Senate back when I was in the U.S. House. It was a bipartisan effort that basically said federal regulators ought to know what the costs are of what they're imposing. We ought to know also what the benefits are, and we ought to know if there are less costly alternatives. The two amendments I'm offering today are drawn from a bill that I introduced back in June called the Unfunded Mandates Accountability Act. It's an effort that now has over 20 co-sponsors, and again, it seems to me it's a common sense effort that should be bipartisan. The First Amendment would strengthen the analysis that's required in some very important ways. First, it requires agencies to specifically assess the potential effect of new regulations on job creation, which is not currently a requirement, and in this economy it must be. Also to consider market-based and non-governmental alternatives to regulation, again, something we need to look at. It also broadens the scope of UMRA to require cost-benefit analysis of rules that impose direct or indirect economic costs of $100 million or more. And it requires agencies to adopt the least costly and least burdensome alternative to achieve the policy goal that's been set out. So currently, agencies have to consider that, but they don't have to follow the least costly alternative. We simply cannot afford that, again, given the tough economic times that we have. The Second Amendment extends these same requirements to the independent agencies. This is incredibly important. And these are agencies like the Commodities Future Trading Commission, the newly formed Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, agencies that are very important on the regulatory side and are currently exempt from these cost-benefit rules that affect all other agencies. On this issue, I was very pleased to see that President Obama issued an executive order in July, which was specifically related to independent agencies. That order and the accompanying presidential memorandum called on independent agencies to participate in a look-back, but also, very importantly, called on independent agencies to evaluate the costs and benefits of new regulations, just as, again, all executive agencies are already required to do. It's a step in the right direction, but the problem is that the President's order is entirely non-binding because a President cannot require independent agencies to do that. Congress can. We can do it by statute. Independent agencies don't answer to the President. So since this order was issued in July, By the way, we have not seen a rush by independent agencies to pledge to comply with these principles. Again, they're not required to. So this amendment, this Second Amendment, would effectively write the President's new request into law so they can be effective. Independent agencies will be required under UMRA to evaluate regulatory costs, benefits, and less costly alternatives before issuing any rule that would impose a cost of $100 million or more on the private sector or on state, local, tribal governments. The fact is that independent agencies are not doing this on their own. According to a 2011 OMB report, not one of the 17 major rules issued by independent agencies in 2010 included an assessment of both costs and benefits. Not one. Closing this independent agency loophole is a reform I think that on both sides of the aisle we should be able to agree with. Certainly the President should agree with, since it's part of his executive order and memorandum, and this is the right vehicle to do it. This is a jobs issue, again, and a common-sense approach. No major regulation, whatever its source, should be imposed on American employers or on state and local government without a serious consideration of the costs, the benefits, and the availability of less burdensome alternatives. These amendments move us further to that goal, and I would urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support them. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak in favor of the two amendments filed by my good friend from Ohio, Senator Portman, my amendment, number 674, and above all else, the issue of the day, jobs. Americans have had to endure great hardship over the past few years. This recession has robbed millions of people of their jobs, their homes, their businesses, and their sense of security. No state has been hit harder than the state of Nevada. My state has the unfortunate distinction of leading the nation in unemployment, foreclosures, and bankruptcies. And there is no question that the status quo of dysfunctional government must end. People from all over the country are struggling just to get by and are desperate for real solutions. The underlying legislation takes the wrong approach to job creation and can be very detrimental to economic growth in our country. Inciting a trade war with China will not create jobs. In my home state of Nevada, a trade war would hurt tourism. It would stifle growth in renewable energy development and increase costs to consumers at a time when they can least afford it. Working to sell American goods in foreign markets is what we should be fighting for. Instead, it seems job creation and economic growth has taken a back seat to political posturing and grandstanding here in Washington. And it is clear that the approach of this administration and its supporters have taken for economic recovery has failed miserably. Out-of-control spending, health care law no one can afford, and seemingly endless streams of regulation are crippling employers, stifling economic growth, and killing jobs. Instead of fighting for measures that create and protect jobs, this administration has created more government that continues to impede economic growth at every turn. This government continues to tax too much, spend too much, and borrow too much. The American public and businesses alike are waiting on a plan that can plant the seeds of economic growth and bolster job creation. Instead, all they get from this government when it comes to job creation is a big, wet blanket. They need Washington to provide relief from new burdensome and overly intrusive regulations. Congress must help job creators by ensuring every regulation is vetted with a full understanding of the impact it will have on businesses across the country. So I'm pleased to join with Senator Portman in this fight to rein in excessive government regulations and implement a market benefit analysis for all agencies, both executive and independent, so that the American public will know the true costs of these regulations. As President Obama said, we must rein in government agencies and force them to help businesses when they refuse to do so. I couldn't agree more. There are a number of actions Congress can take immediately to help bolster our nation's economy. The adoption of Senator Portman's amendments is one of those actions. I look forward to continuing to work with him on these issues. I believe our best days are still ahead, but we need to change course now. We need to roll back the regulations that are tying the hands of entrepreneurs across America. We can help hasten an economic recovery by embracing pro-growth policies that place more money in the pockets of Americans. I'd also like to highlight another issue that would help create jobs and provide certainty for the businesses across the country, and that is that Congress should pass a budget. Congress has not passed a budget in nearly 2.5 years. Passing a comprehensive budget is one of the most basic responsibilities of Congress, but it has failed to accomplish this task. America desperately needs a comprehensive 10-year plan that offers real solutions to the economic and fiscal problems in this country. We cannot lower unemployment rates in Nevada or restore the housing market without a holistic approach to reining in federal spending and lowering the national debt. Congress passed another continuing resolution that lacks a long-term approach to restoring our nation to fiscal sanity. Instead, this bill funds the government for just a few more months. Congress cannot continue to function without a measure of accountability to hold members of Congress to their constitutionally mandated responsibility, which is why I introduced the No Budget, No Pay Amendment, Amendment number 674. This measure requires Congress to pass a budget resolution by the beginning of any fiscal year. If Congress fails to pass a budget, then members of Congress do not get paid. How can Congress commit to a debt reduction plan without a budget? Any serious proposal to rein in federal spending and create jobs starts with a responsible budget. At home in Nevada and across this country, if you don't accomplish the tasks your job requires, you do not get paid. Somehow this very basic standard of responsibility is lost upon Washington. The no budget, no pay is not an end-all solution to our economic difficulties. It is, however, an important measure that Congress should adopt in order to show the American people that members of Congress are serious about restoring our country to a period of economic prosperity. Nevadans work hard for their paychecks, so should Congress. And since the majority believes the legislation before us today is a jobs bill, I encourage them to take up other measures that will help with job creation, such as opening our country to energy exploration, streamlining the permitting process for responsible development of our domestic resources, and take the aggressive steps of reforming our tax code. Let's make the tax code simpler for individuals and employers, cut out the special interest loopholes while reducing the overall tax burden for all Americans. Instead of looking for new ways to tax the American public, we should make our tax code more competitive and provide businesses the stability they need to grow and to create jobs. The continual threat to increase taxes feeds the uncertainty that serves as an impediment to economic growth. These are all things that both this administration and Congress could do immediately to boost economic recovery. Let's give the American people a government that works for them. Removing impediments to job creation will get Americans working again and ensure our children and grandchildren have a brighter future. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. President, I suggest an absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll of the Senate.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection, the senator from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to talk on the bill that we are debating on the floor about China currency. And let me say a few things here. To me, And to many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, very little we could do could be more important in both the short term and the long term than to require China to pay a price if they continue to flaunt international trade rules and manipulate their currency, causing their imports to America, their exports to America, our imports, to be much cheaper than they should be, and causing American exports to China, their imports of our goods, to be more expensive than they should be. Now, in the short term, it's been estimated by EPI that 2 million jobs could be created over 2 years if we pass this legislation and China's currency were no longer misaligned. But there's a long-term issue, Mr. President, and that is this. The bottom line is, what is our future here in this country? It's good, high-paying jobs. It's companies, large and small, that create high-end products, products that take a lot of know-how, products that take a lot of skill to create, products that basically are the high-end in terms of both manufacturing and services. That is our future. Those are our crown jewels. And when you ask, as many of us ask the question, how in a worldwide economy can America compete? The answer is those companies. I might add, most of those companies are not large companies. They're smaller companies. They're small business people with great ideas or a new way of providing a service or creating a product. And they are the people who employ about 65% of the new jobs in America. They are our future. Some of them will grow into very large companies. Many will stay employing 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 people. But they are on the front lines of world trade. And what have we found over the last decade? In almost 10 years since China joined the WTO, we have lost 2.8 million jobs simply due to the Chinese government's manipulation of currency. We've lost thousands more jobs elsewhere because China steals our intellectual property. China has a mercantilist policy of taking an industry and nurturing it with local subsidies, and then those subsidies make the product so cheap that they export and overwhelm our market. That's what's happening in solar cells, the solar panels. They can take an advantage they naturally have, like rare earths, and again oppose WTO rules and say to companies, if you want these rare earths, which you need for your product, you've got to make it in China. They do this over and over and over again. And why do I and Senator Brown and Senator Graham and so many others feel so strongly about this? Because we know if the present trend continues, as Robert Samuelson, the economist, noted in an op-ed in the Washington Post the other day, that basically it's a disaster for America. Because if when a young entrepreneur creates a product or a service, and that entrepreneur is overwhelmed by a Chinese product that has unfair advantage, we don't have a future. That's it. Many people worry about the budget deficit as the biggest problem America faces. It's a large problem, and I hope we solve it. I will work hard to solve it. But to me, the number one problem America faces is how do we become the production giant that we were over the last several decades, but no longer seem to be. We are indeed a consumption giant. We consume more than anybody of our own products and other people's. But you cannot be a consumption giant for many years on end if you're not also a production giant. And what is probably the major factor, external factor, that contributes to making us a consumption giant rather than a production giant? It's the Chinese manipulation of currency, because it discourages production in America and encourages consumption of undervalued Chinese goods at the same time. And the anguish that many of us feel about the future of this country translates directly into this legislation. I know there are lots of academics who sit there up in their ivory towers, editorial writers. They love to look at this legislation and just without even examining its consequences say, that's protectionist. This is not protectionism. In fact, this legislation is in the name of free trade, because free trade implies a floating currency. That's what was set up in Bretton Woods. That was the equilibrium when things got out of, that was the equilibrium creator when things got out of whack. But it doesn't exist for China. Now, there are lots of countries that have pegged their currency in the past and we paid no attention. Because if you have 0.01% of world GDP and you're worried that your tiny little currency will be overwhelmed, to peg it, by world trends, to peg it doesn't create much trouble. When you're the second largest economic power in the world, when you're the largest or second largest exporter in the world, to peg your currency totally discombobulates the world trading system. And so given the danger to the future of our country, and given the danger to the continuation of world trade by China continuing its currency manipulation, why isn't there more of an outcry? That's the question I ask myself. And I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer. Perhaps it's because those editorial writers and big thinkers don't talk to the manufacturers of high-end products in New York State that I talk to, who see that they can't compete against China unfairly because of currency manipulation. Whether it's a ceramic that goes into power plants that I talked about yesterday, or even just a high-end window that is used for major office buildings and museums. China uses its currency manipulation to gain unfair advantage over our companies up and down the line. But maybe those in the ivory towers don't talk to the manufacturers on the ground, as so many of us do, because that's our job and that's our living. Maybe it's because global companies have fought our provision in the interest of their shareholders. I don't begrudge the big companies. Their job is to maximize their share price. And if firing 10,000 American workers and moving them to China and creating those 10,000 jobs in China gives them more profitability, in part because of currency manipulation, yeah, that's what corporations are supposed to do. But that's not in America's interest. It may have been in General Electric, a company that has lots of New York presence and that I like very much. But it may have been in their interest to sign a contract for wind turbines and give to China intellectual property in return. But it sure wasn't in the workers in Schenectady's interest, even if it might have been in the overall shareholders of GE's interest. So maybe it's because the Business Roundtable and the Chamber of Commerce, who is dominated by the larger manufacturers and the larger service companies and the larger financial institutions, they don't really care about American wealth and jobs. They care about their own profitability and sales and share price, and if moving to China improves that, they do it. And if China has an unfair advantage, so be it. That's not their job. Maybe that's the reason. That's beginning to change, by the way, Mr. President. When I last visited China, I met with the heads of the China divisions of many of our largest companies. And I had met with the same people several years before and intermittently, some of them through the in-between. And their tone had totally changed. They were exasperated with China's mercantilist policies. One manufacturer who had been one of the leaders in saying, don't touch China, because they exported a ton of goods to China, had a whole different tone. They said, you know what China tells us now? We can only export certain of our goods, the ones that China doesn't make, and then the rest we have to make in China and in certain provinces. This is a large, huge, multi-billion-dollar U.S. company. A major retailer, told us that they can't run their stores the way they'd like in China because China dictates what they can and cannot have on their shelves, and half the products on their shelves in American stores cannot, by Chinese government dictate, be in the stores in the Chinese stores' shelves. So even our large companies are sort of realizing that China's not just letting China get away with all these violations of free trade, all these violations of WTO, no longer serves their interest, although admittedly they have not yet come around to support our bill. And then there are those who are fearful that the Chinese will retaliate. That one drives me the craziest. I grew up in Brooklyn, and when there were bullies, and you didn't stand up for yourself, they bullied you and bullied you and bullied you some more. If you stood up to them, yeah, there was going to be some retaliation. But it was a lot better than giving in and giving in and giving in. Well, that's what we've done with China. Will China retaliate if this bill becomes law and hundreds of American companies go to have countervailing duties imposed? Yeah. But the Chinese know. They have far more to lose in a trade war than we do. Their economy is far more dependent on exports. Just look at the percentage in terms of GDP than ours are. They are far more dependent on the American market than we are on the Chinese market, as important as it is to many of our companies. So while China will retaliate in a measured way, they're not going to create a trade war. It's not in their interest. They can't afford to. And I have news for those who are worried about a trade war. We're in one. When China manipulates its currency, when China steals intellectual property, when China uses rare earths to lure businesses here, when they take our intellectual property and then bring it to factories in China and subsidize those factories in China against WTO rules and then try to export the product here as they're doing, say, with solar panels, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a trade war, as millions of Americans who have lost their jobs realize. So we're in the war. We may as well arm ourselves so we might win. So the bottom line is very simple. I hope this bill moves forward. And I hope that it goes through the House. A large vote here in the Senate tomorrow will be a message to the House, a bill, Senator Brown's bill, which of course his bill and our bill have been combined. But Senator Brown's bill passed in the House a few years ago, and I hope the President rethinks things and signs it. Because if he does, my prediction is that China, who never backs off when it's in their own economic interest, will, because it will no longer be in their economic interest, because there will be penalties imposed and equality imposed upon them once this bill is law. So they will actually let their currency float, maybe not quite as quickly as we would want, but far more quickly than it happens now, once this bill becomes law. In my view, the arguments that have been raised against America taking action to deal with unfair Chinese currency manipulation are outdated, wrong, ineffectual. I've been arguing the other side, our side, for 5 years. When Senator Graham and I first started talking about currency manipulation and imposing a tariff, both the New York Times and Wall Street Journal editorial boards, one very liberal, one very conservative, said China should be allowed to peg its currency. So we've made progress, at least in the intellectual strength of or in the intellectual argument. But we have to take that strength and translate it into action because, Mr. President, millions of American jobs, ultimately trillions of American dollars of wealth, and nothing less than the future of our country is at stake. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Waiting for senators to return to the floor, debating a bill on the manipulation of currency in China. See a senator making his way to the podium. A quick reminder on C-SPAN 3 right now, a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing discussing the role of judges under the Constitution. We're hearing from Antonin Scalia, the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, along with Associate Justice Stephen Breyer. That live for you right now on C-SPAN 3. As we wait for senators to come back to the floor here of the U.S. Senate, a quick program note. Right now on C-SPAN 3, we have live coverage of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're hearing right now from Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonin Scalia. He and Justice Stephen Breyer talking about the role of judges under the Constitution. We also have that for you at our website, cspan.org.
Thank you.